So a recent series of lawsuits, interviews and leaks have proven that the Biden administration are outsourcing a sort of Silicon Valley Patriot Act 2.0 to subcontractors in social media. In this segment, we're going to walk through just some of the recent examples of the permanent, unelected state surveilling innocent Americans, just so you can show your more critical, Bush-hating relatives that the same reprehensible acts enacted by the people that got us into the Iraq War are now being done by the Democrats as well. It's not just party-specific, it's across parties that they just kind of want to spy on you. So let's start with remarks by President Biden at the United We Stand summit, because the Democrats have said endlessly, we're trying to bring the country together. Does Biden feel like much of a unifying force? I mean, I don't really think the giant red deaths to MAGA speech did all that much, but he says here...
We're bringing you together as long as you agree with us.
Yes, yeah, we'll bring you together after we've cut your head off and we'll refuse it just for the burial. We have to stand united against hate-fueled violence because it's real, and you know it better than anyone, to affirm that an attack on one group is literally an attack on all of us. Jill and I, my wife Jill, travelled to Buffalo to grieve with families and deliver a message from deep in our nation's soul. In America, evil will not win. It will not prevail. Hate will not prevail. And white supremacists will not have the last word. And this venom and violence cannot be the story of our time. So we have convened this summit to make clear what the story of our time must be. It has to be a story in which each and every one of us has a vital role to play. A story with this message from the White House: united, united we stand. So then he goes on to repeat the incredibly divisive lie that he ran for president because of Donald Trump saying that Charlottesville, the Nazis were very fine people on both sides, even though we know for a fact that he said, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists, because they'll be condemned totally. And he was just talking about the people protesting the fact that we shouldn't topple statues, which is a fairly principled stance. The White House then this press release then editorializes his speech, because he says, every other nation is based on ethnicity, geography. In America, we're based on an idea, literally, not figuratively. An idea. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all, and then they put in parentheses, women and then it goes back to men are created equal, endowed by their, and that's there was edited, creator, etc. It's quite interesting that again, he's done the tail off of, we hold these truths to be self-evident. You know the thing. I don't understand how you can say you're a unifying American president and then can't even get through the Declaration of Independence or any words from the Constitution, but amnesia doesn't seem to be the least of Biden's worries.
I was going to say, you haven't put in, repeat the line, end of quote.
Or the best one, that's, American can be defined by a single word. He then says, the idea of America is that it guarantees everyone is treated with dignity and equality. An idea that ensures an inclusive, multiracial democracy. An idea that we give no safe harbour, none, to hate. Well, America doesn't treat all people equally, and nowhere does, because that's a preaching of moral apathy. We don't treat our criminals equally, for example. But the Democrats seem to be doing so because they've just scrapped, for example, cash bail in Chicago for second-degree murder. So they're just letting murderers out on the street. So they really are treating people equally. Everyone gets out, even if you've killed someone. So then Biden runs through a list of aggrieved groups. So he starts to build this constituency of exactly who he's targeting here, who we all need to unite behind, who needs to be this new aristocratic class telling us how to live. Look, I'm not naive. Kamala and I travelled to Atlanta to grieve with Asian American residents. Violence against the community rose during the pandemic. Too many people fearful just walking the streets in America, mainly in San Francisco. And we can't talk about the ethnicity of the attackers of Asian Americans because that would be white supremacist, of course. Jewish high holidays approach. Families will gather for reflection under the shadow of the rise of anti-Semitism in just 4 years. Again, look at New York. The ethnicities of the attacker don't quite fit the white supremacist narrative, do they? Just 4 years after the attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the deadliest attack of anti-Semitism in our nation's history. Of course, wrong. This summer, 31 white supremacists in Idaho were stopped from unleashing hateful violence just before they reached a pride celebration, a threat following a record year of violence against transgender Americans. Ken, can't talk about the Pulse nightclub shooting because that would raise the perpetrator doesn't quite fit the box of the narrative here. Today, with the fall semester starting, we're joined by presidents of historically black colleges and universities who should be able to focus on providing the best experience possible for their students, but instead are having to worry about more bomb threats against their institutions. Again, 2020 Summer of Love. How many firebombs were thrown by BLM rioters? But we can't talk about that. Too often, Native American, disabled Americans face harassment, discrimination, violence and victimization. Unfortunately, such hate-fueled violence and threats are not new to America. There is a through line of hate from massacres of indigenous people to the original sin of slavery, the terror of the Klan, to anti-immigration violence against the Irish, Italians, Chinese, Mexicans, and so many others laced throughout our history. There's a through line of violence against religious groups, anti-Semitic, anti-Catholic, anti-Mormon, anti-Muslim, anti-Hindu, anti-Sikh. Look, folks, and all that through line of hate never goes away, it only hides. Again, how can you claim to be a patriotic, unifying American president when you're just saying, my entire nation is steeped in the original sin of bigotry?
The framing of this argument is so dishonest. I wonder why I get wound up when I watch some politicians speak, and when you actually analyse a speech like this, and you see, like, nobody talks about English Americans. And the sort of subtext here is that the English Americans are the perpetrators of all this, because they're the one guys that can't possibly be a victim of anything, and if they ever are a victim, it's because of what happened in the past, and it's justified. And it's really concerning.
They're the only subgroup excluded from equal moral consideration.
Well, yes, either everyone's treated equally or they're not.
Yeah. And so much for Biden preaching that, huh? So then he claims white supremacy is the leading domestic terror threat, and then also that silence is violence. You know, as a result, our own intelligence agencies in the United States of America have determined domestic terrorism rooted in white supremacy is the greatest terrorist threat to our homeland today.
Really?
Yeah, never mind Antifa people running up to people in the street and gunning them down or hitting them with cars, as we saw yesterday.
White supremacy is the greatest terrorist threat to our homeland today. Yeah. White supremacy. That's just not true.
No, only if you live in an ideological bubble.
How many white supremacist suicide bombers are there?
Or actually mass shootings. They've excluded gang and drive-by shootings from the classification of mass shootings, but if you include those, again, the ethnicity of the perpetrators is not convenient for the narrative, let's say. And it seems to be a consequence of Democrat cities.
But if they're so dishonest...
Neighbourhoods.
Sorry about that. But if they're so dishonest about this, and about the way they frame the argument, and there's this one group... I mean, the long-term damage to social cohesion. No wonder so many people are so angry. And no wonder so many people are put into more extreme philosophical positions than they would otherwise adopt, because they're pushed there.
Yeah.
It's really bad.
I think it's an intentional stoking of the flames just because they believe their side can win. That's, for example, when the postmodernists...
I don't think they even realise what they're doing.
I do. I don't think we can attribute incompetence at this point. Maybe to Biden, of course, because he doesn't have a brain left. It's mainly rotted away. But a lot of his handlers are steeped in critical race theory ideologies, and they intentionally raise racial consciousness to then incite a Marxist revolution along race-based lines. So they're intentionally trying to kickstart an ethnic conflict. And so when you take away the tool of dialogue as a mediating tool between groups, so we can talk to each other, where we can settle our differences, where we can make jokes across racial lines because that is true equality, as you would say, then the only way of resolving a conflict is violence. And they know that, and I think they're pushing us there because they think their side will win. And I don't want a race war, funnily enough, because I'm not one of these evil, insane people. I don't think white supremacy is the biggest terror threat, because I think you guys are manufacturing the problem, because, funnily enough, not a lot of white people feel kinship with their fellow white people. It's just a strange worldview.
As you can tell, I'm white, and I talk to a lot of white people, and I don't think I have ever met anyone. I must have met someone at some point in my life, but I don't think I've ever sat down with anyone, and he's just sat there and made the case to me for white supremacy.
No.
I just don't. I mean, I'm sure that person exists somewhere, but nobody's ever said that.
I've encountered one or two, and they're instantly irksome. And also, it's not like...
I've met people who are, like, worried about the erosion of British or English or whatever cultural history and that kind of thing, but that's not advocating white supremacy.
I mean, I've met actual people who think that I've met, I think, 2 or 3 people in my entire lifetime who have tried to infiltrate groups that are just sort of the dissident right, that go, okay, we've been pushed out by the left, and go, yeah, isn't that right? Now, isn't the solution, all you whites unite? And it's like, no. Everyone in that group's got,
as soon as you start labelling any argument you don't like as a white supremacist argument, I mean, it's saying it's the literally Hitler argument.
Yes. Oh, we'll get onto that later. Don't you worry.
Okay.
So, then he goes on to a very Orwellian policy promise as a way of resolving this, right? On Biden's first day in office, he says, I directed my national security and homeland security team to develop a first ever security strategy for countering domestic terrorism. The goal was to improve and enhance our understanding of this growing threat within our country, prevent people from being mobilized to violence, to counter the relentless exploitation of the internet, to recruit and mobilize domestic terrorism. And there's more we have to do together for the whole government approach and the whole nation approach. So that just sounds like fascism. Nothing outside the state, nothing against the state, etc. And you're melding the public and private spheres to make this gigantic state organ all flowing in the same direction, and nothing is outside the purview of state surveillance. That's why today we are launching a new White House initiative on hate-motivated violence. We're going to use every federal resource available to help communities counter hate-fueled violence, build resilience, and foster greater national unity. For example, trainings on identifying, reporting, and combating hate-fueled violence for local law enforcement agencies, workplaces, and houses of worship, making everyone an informant. Partnerships with schools.
What other kind of violence is there apart from hate-fueled?
Yeah, you don't beat someone up because you love them, do you?
No.
But it's strange how, for example, crimes of passion or jealousy aren't listed as hate-fueled violence. It's just the protected classes that we'd like to exalt. Very frustrating. But folks, this is just the beginning. Sounds like a threat. A new bipartisan initiative, Dignity US, will take this nation and this national conversation we launched today on the road across all 50 states and the District of Columbia. A bipartisan presidential center and senior officials from prior Democrat and Republican administrations will all support this effort. We'll get onto that in a moment. We're also about to meet some local heroes as we're honoring the Uniters, 21 fellow Americans, pastors, rabbis, imams, building relationships across faiths, a police officer educating fellow law enforcement officers, a middle school student mobilizing her community, a filmmaker documenting the epidemic of missing and murdered indigenous people, and so many more who are taking a stand. And I'm calling on Congress to get rid of special immunity for social media companies and impose much stronger transparency requirements on all of them. So you see how the narrative converges. You're making everyone in every workplace, every government institution, every school an informant. You're putting specific ideologues there to tell you the correct narrative within your faith, within your ethnic community, which they homogenize you as. And then you're also removing the even veneer of neutrality by Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley are explicitly a Democrat Party apparatus. But now, even if there's dissidence within the company, now you're going to be legally bound to parrot the state-approved narrative. And we seem to have scrapped Nina Jankowicz's Department of Truth, but it's now been just involved into the various disparate apparatus rather than being a central government agency that says, here's the correct narrative. Well, now they're just going to tell each of the arms, the tendrils of this weird octopus that are reaching further into our lives, what to do and how to surveil us. So then we actually have the website up here, dignity.us. If you go to the website yourselves, you can hover over the strange wall of black and white photos from people that are testimonies, and they're just intersectional aggrieved groups. You know, there's obviously legitimate people on there that say, oh, I survived the Holocaust, but then there's also, oh, I got insulted when I was in high school for being brown, and it's just, okay, well, that's an order of magnitude very different. It's co-chaired by Obama and Bush administration staff, again, showing the Uniparty. There is one Trump administration staff member who was on the coronavirus task force before he resigned. This is Joe Grogan, and he actually stonewalled the Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar, and this is according to a Politico report, which will be linked in the show notes but isn't here, who at the time was intent on finally getting rid of Obamacare, but was blocked by not just Republican senators who thought it was a wedge issue, but also Grogan. And Grogan is now on this website. So it's one of the traitors in the Trump administration, and a bunch of the deep state Uniparty staff are part of this weird wall of shame, where you can just say, oh, this person did this to me, and also here's the ideologically correct narrative for every institution. So just when Trump banned critical race theory and Biden reversed it, now it seems that it's making it the official doctrine of every single institution, and the state is sponsoring it. Very disturbing stuff. So, just a reminder, the DOJ had spied on parents at school board meetings. This was Merrick Garland, also responsible for signing off on the Trump raid. Attorney General had directed the FBI and the US Attorney's offices to investigate a group of parents, quote, after a group that represents school boards urged the Biden administration to review whether confrontations by outraged parents over COVID restrictions and critical race theory violated the Patriot Act. So again, they're surveilling you, they're setting up an ideologically correct narrative, and if you go against it, you're a, quote, enemy to democracy, and you should be investigated as a domestic terrorist. So parents said, don't mask my kids up in school, it's going to impede their speech and language learning development. Oh, you're put on a no-fly list. Lovely way to treat your fellow Americans, isn't it? Definitely not divisive at all. Remember that COVID started this. So if we go on to the next one. The US Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, fights health misinformation. He gave this really bizarre press conference where he said, health misinformation is false, inaccurate, or misleading information about health, according to the best evidence at the time. And you see the narrative constantly changes, and if the government determines it's true in that moment, then, sorry, comrade, you violated political correctness. There goes your account. And while it often appears innocuous on social media and retail sites or search engines, the truth is that misinformation takes away our freedom to make informed decisions about our health and the health of our loved ones. So unless you parrot our narrative, you don't have any freedom at all. How deeply subversive is that? So then Dr. Murthy wants an all-hands-on-deck approach, you see the mobilization of the entire state again, with health organizations and physicians communicating with their parents to make sure they have the facts, and educational institutions and foundations improving health and information literacy. The Rockefeller Foundation has announced a $13.5 million commitment to counter health misinformation, while the Digital Public Library of America is convening scholars and leaders to combat health misinformation. Again, the private sector that are subsidizing this information, the public sector putting their ideological narrative spinners in place. A major player in the information/disinformation, not misinformation there, very telling, battle are the big tech companies, which are being asked to operate with greater transparency and accountability and take action against misinformation superspreaders. Yeah, good luck getting them to operate with greater transparency, eh? The Surgeon General has asked them in his advisory to step up their efforts to reduce misinformation and take aggressive action, quote, because it's costing people their lives. Now, do you know the difference, definitionally, between disinformation and misinformation? No. It's very interesting. Misinformation is accidentally spread stuff. So, like, a post on social media that says, aliens built the pyramids, right? Whether or not they did, we can't confirm, of course. But they define that as misinformation, and they go, fact-checked. Actually, the Egyptians built the pyramids in this, and this year. Disinformation is intentionally spread propaganda by an enemy state to demoralize the population. But notice how they keep conflating the two there. So they're basically treating Americans who are skeptical of COVID policies, we aren't saying anything about the vaccine on YouTube, of course, as a kind of enemy state within the state that are trying to demoralize the real democratic Americans who did their job and get vaccinated. So they're labeling you an enemy of the state if you question their policies. That is just deeply disturbing.
It really is.
So Silicon Valley has now subcontracted this misinformation crusade, there we go, to Silicon Valley. As we see with this Alex Berenson, who's a journalist who was banned from Twitter over questioning COVID policy, let's say, and he sued Twitter and got his account back. But during the lawsuit and the settlement, he has revealed that he found out that the Biden administration were directly pressuring Twitter themselves to shut down his account. So the White House are censoring American citizens directly in backroom deals. They even actually at one point tried to get them to shut down a Fauci parody account, saying, oh, this isn't one of ours, it has to be gone. That's how sensitive these people are. So Berenson said, after previously hinting that the Biden administration may have played a role in deplatforming him from Twitter, he published screenshots of an April 2021 exchange between Twitter employees regarding a meeting it had with White House officials. They had one really tough question about why Alex Berenson hasn't been kicked off the platform, the Twitter employee wrote on the workplace communication platform Slack. In another post, the Twitter employee wrote, they really wanted to know why Berenson... about Berenson, Andy Slavitt suggested they had seen data that showed he was the epicenter of disinformation that radiated outwards towards a persuadable public. Slavitt had served as a White House COVID advisor until he left the Biden administration in June 2021. So this is the guy who got Berenson taken down. Berenson confirmed with Fox News Digital that he had obtained the Slack communications as part of his settled lawsuit against Twitter, but he couldn't elaborate. But he did add, I hope and expect to have more information to report soon. So then he went on Joe Rogan Experience and he said, I had a whistleblower inside Twitter saying they wanted to actually debate about COVID policy within the company, but were immediately shut down. And it's because of the pressure exerted on them by the Biden administration from within the White House that they're just kicking Americans off of the platform.
Yeah, we're going to come to a story about PayPal in a bit, but we know that the same thing is going on there. And yeah, the government is using big tech as a tool. And it is very concerning.
Well, if they have a monopoly on the public square, then...
and these big tech, whether it agrees with the government line or not, whether it's YouTube or Twitter or PayPal or Facebook, whatever it is going to toe the line in order to survive.
Absolutely.
It's a business.
Yeah, you have a financial incentive there to just keep your head down.
Yeah.
But
especially now they've got the monopoly on their little
yeah.
bits of the internet.
As soon as we see Jack Dorsey ducking out from being Twitter CEO, for example, he comes out and said, yeah, there was pressure on me to censor the Hunter Biden laptop story. Yes, we were wrong to do this, that, and the other. There was a time even when Vijaya Gad and Jack Dorsey went on Joe Rogan with Tim Pool. I don't know if you've seen the episode.
I haven't.
But it was in 2018 or 2019, well before COVID, and they said, we won't censor vaccine misinformation because anti-vaxxers are entitled to their wrong views. And look what happened there. It became suddenly very expedient to censor people who were critical of COVID policy. Again,
I'm really surprised that this is still going on now. Because in the UK, I mean, COVID's not a thing anymore.
No, we were one of the flagship countries to decommission our COVID policies and live freely, even though it's very interesting that...
It happened accidentally.
Yes, because of Partygate.
Yeah.
And then it was about a couple of days
It happened for the wrong
before-
reasons.
Well, also it happened a couple of days before the Ukraine invasion was announced. But
No, it goes back to December, I think, of last year when Boris was about to lock us down again.
Yes.
And Steve Baker and various others on the backbenches said, if you
Rebelled.
lock us down, we are vote of no confidence. And so we changed tack. And then over the next couple of months, our COVID rates were no different from everywhere that locked down on the continent. And so it just made the whole thing look farcical.
But they did bring they were originally going to have the restrictions delayed, repealing them until, I believe it was June, and they brought them back to about April. And that was a couple of days after they had the Ukraine war briefing. So but this
Putin ended COVID.
Yeah. Well, let's not give
But
the
I
man
was
too
going
much
to
credit,
France in March skiing, and you had to go and sit in an outside restaurant. You had to have your vaccine thingy, and the police were giving people fines for not wearing masks on the chairlifts.
Yeah, they were throwing tear gas in open air cafes because people weren't moving.
I mean, please.
It's genuinely contemptible. But if you questioned any of that, and you were an American, the White House were rifling through your tweets. They were getting you kicked off platforms. And if we go to a New York Post article, if you questioned the American election, for example, the most safe and secure election in history, then the FBI were going through your private messages.
Okay. Gosh.
Yes, on
My
Facebook.
mum lives in the States, and she's still wearing masks and stuff.
Oh, she bought the...
she feels
line.
vulnerable. She got pretty bad long COVID.
Right.
So she's scared of it.
There was a study that came out fairly recently, I believe even CNN reported on it, that the symptoms of self-perceived long COVID are increased if you have a pre-existing history of anxiety and depression. So we, of course, cannot claim it is hypochondria, but CNN appeared to be spreading health misinformation.
Hypochondria is a bit of an extreme term, but there's definitely a psychosomatic effect.
Sadly so. So if we look at the New York Post's special report, this obviously makes sense when Mark Zuckerberg told Joe Rogan that the FBI had he went very willingly to censor the Hunter Biden laptop story. But the New York Post says Facebook had spied on the private messages of Americans who had questioned the 2020 election. Facebook has been spying on the messages and data of American users and reporting them to the FBI if they expressed anti-government or anti-authority sentiments or questioned the 2020 election, according to sources within the Department of Justice itself. Under the FBI collaboration, somebody at Facebook red flagged supposedly subversive private messages, over the past 19 months and submitted them in redacted form to the Domestic Terrorism Operational Unit at the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., without a subpoena. So it was completely below board, not at all legally justified. It was done outside the legal process and without probable cause, said one of the sources, who spoke on the condition of anonymity. Facebook provides the FBI with private conversations, which are protected by the First Amendment without any subpoena. The FBI, however, found no actionable criminal activity from any of the messages they reviewed. So you must have poured through millions, and 0 Americans could have been prosecuted by it. The Facebook users whose private communications Facebook had red flagged as domestic terrorism for the FBI were, quote, all conservative right-wing individuals. They were gun-toting, red-blooded Americans, angry after the election, and shooting off their mouths and talking about staging protests. There was nothing criminal, nothing about violence, and nothing about massacres or assassinating anyone. As soon as a subpoena was requested within an hour, Facebook sent back gigabytes of data and photos. It was ready to go. They were just waiting for that legal process so they could send it. So then Facebook tried to deny this and also affirmed it, so they contradicted themselves within two contrasting statements in about an hour apart. So Erica Sakin, a spokesperson at Facebook's parent company Meta, I hate that name, claimed Facebook's interactions with the FBI were designed to, quote, protect people from harm. In her second, updated statement, Sakin altered her language to say the claims are wrong and not false. So it's actually in reverse order. Originally said it's a good thing, and then they said we aren't doing it. When normally it's we're not doing this, and then 6 months down the line, oh, but we did it, but it was for a good thing. It was to protect your health, to protect the NHS. So it's strange that Facebook haven't quite caught up on the leftist train of narratives yet. Sakin, funnily enough, is a DC-based crisis response expert who previously worked for Planned Parenthood and Obama for America, and now leads Facebook's communications on counterterrorism and dangerous organizations and individuals. So do we think that there might be a little bit of bias at work there in who they're trawling through the messages of at all? Yeah. So we shouldn't underestimate the impacts of this. If we go on to the next, we're not going to read through this, but of course everyone's seen this famous one, the Confessional by Time magazine, the secret history of the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election, where they literally use the word cabal to describe Silicon Valley, NGOs, and politicians working together to ensure that Donald Trump did not storm into the White House and have another terrible term, and it was definitely all above board, of course. It was the most safe and secure election in American history. If we'd like to go on to what they hid, if you sign up to lotuscaesars.com, you'll be able to watch Josh and Carl go through the despicable, debauched degeneracy of Hunter Biden. We subjected Josh to not only Hunter Biden's laptop, but the iCloud leaks. And so he went through all of the alleged crimes and things caught on video by the Biden's least favourite son. And dear God, if this would have come out before the election, of course, you see some swing voters that said, oh, I wouldn't have voted for that. Well, the consequences of suppressing this information and persecuting Americans who dissent is that someone gets into the White House without voters being fully informed as to the business dealings and degenerate activities of his family. And I don't understand how you can have an informed democracy with that kind of conduct, of course. But, as you preambled, could be worse, because Trump is literally Hitler. Yeah. The bad orange man played a horrible song at his rally, and that's right, he's way worse. Way, way worse. While speaking in Youngstown in support of J.D. Vance, whom he has endorsed in Ohio's Republican nominee for Senate race, Mr. Trump delivered a dark address about the decline of America over music that was all but identical to a song called WWG1WGA, an abbreviation for the QAnon slogan, "Where we go one, we go all." As Mr. Trump spoke, scores of people in the crowd raised fingers in the air in an apparent reference to the one in which they thought was the song's title. It was the first time in memory that some Trump aides had seen such a display that occurred at one of his rallies. Mr. Trump's aide said the song played at the rally was called Mirrors, and it was selected for use in the video that Mr. Trump played at the conservative meeting CPAC and posted on the social media site Truth Social, but it sounds strikingly similar to the QAnon theme song. Again, this is just BlueAnon, this is just Democrat conspiracy mongering. I don't think an entire crowd of Trump's supporters believe that there's someone on 4chan posting leaks from inside the administration that Trump is suddenly going to become secretly president tomorrow. He's going to storm back into the White House. I don't think everyone raising their finger as number one is in cahoots with the QAnon conspiracy theory. There's like 2 people that actually believe it online, maybe. But subsequently, Nazi Germany trended on Twitter, because of course it did. Yep, great. Also trending in the United Kingdom. Look, we report on American politics here because we want our former colony, don't get upset viewers, to have the best government possible, especially because when America catches a cold, you know, when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. That's the old saying. But why is Trump living rent-free in random UK Twitter leftist activists' heads? Literally, people are comparing it to the 1930s Germany salute. Bit delusional. But if we come on to the last one, we've got one white pill. Thought we'd end on a happy note, shall we? Alex Berenson. Boom, I say again boom. The Federal Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals just said that Twitter and other social media platforms don't have an unlimited right to discriminate against speech. So, turns out the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, if you scroll down just slightly, John, so I can read the press release. The First Amendment protects speech. It generally prevents the government from interfering with people's speech or forcing them to speak. The platforms argue that because they host and transmit speech, the First Amendment also gives them an unqualified license to invalidate the laws that hinder them from censoring speech they don't like. And they say that license entitles them to pre-enforcement facile relief against HB20. We reject the platform's attempt to extract a freewheeling censorship right from the Constitution's free speech guarantee. The platforms are not newspapers. Their censorship is not speech. They are not entitled to pre-enforcement facile relief. And HB20 is constitutional because it neither compels nor obstructs the platform's own speech in any way. The District Court erred in concluding otherwise and abused its discretion by issuing a preliminary injunction. The preliminary injunction is vacated, and this case is remanded for further proceedings consistent with this opinion. This opens the door to Berenson uncovering a bunch of censorship by Silicon Valley over the course of the pandemic. And we will hopefully see the collusion between the Biden White House and Silicon Valley to enact a sort of Patriot Act 2.0 on law-abiding Americans that just have questions about some of the policies they dislike. And I don't know about you, but I'm quite happy at that prospect.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with this, and then they'll raise an inquiry. There'll be an inquiry, and that'll take 5 years, and then it'll be even longer than the Chilcot report, and so on and so forth. And the perpetrators, you know, they won't be taken into account. There might be a couple. I mean, America does this stuff better than we do, but yeah, I'd much rather it happen before the event than after.
So did
but
I.
It's still good.
Yes, let's hope that Trump's Schedule F, where he's going to remove plenty of deep state operatives who don't get their money's worth, goes ahead, and we get some people to actually prosecute this on principle, and we see Silicon Valley become the speech utilities and platforms rather than the censorious publishers that they have appointed themselves as. And if we can get the government narrative, the current thing, out of our ability to speak freely as is our right, then, well, that'll make for a much better democracy over in the US, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the Epoch series, this one on Harold Hardrada between Carl and Bo. If you want to find out what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.